Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum and good evening. Today, in fact, I'm going to discuss China and the United States relations, especially the trade relation, that the trade war that we have been witnessing since Trump took over the White House as the new president of the United States of America. And there were certain trade and commercial, disputes or problems or difficulties that the two countries were facing. The recent meeting at South Korea, a lot of progress has been made. So we are going to discuss about that. And then I'm also going to discuss about the CPEC, its impact on Pakistan and the China's economies. So I have a very prominent professor, associate professor of history, Mr. Ma Haiyun. He's in Frostburg State University, Maryland, United States of America. In fact, he is joining from America. Thank you very much, Professor, for your precious time. And I welcome you on my show.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you.
My first question is, do you think that the distance that the two countries, the Chinese and the Americans governments, they were witnessing for last maybe many months since Mr. Trump took over as the president of the United States of America, the trade war that we have been witnessing, do you think that it is going to be subsidized and they're going to have once again the same cordial trade relations between the two nations?
Well, actually, if you look at the US-China relations, especially trade relations, it's actually started from Trump's first term. So it's actually a long time. But it's really reflect a structural, difference or even competition between US and China. And of course, when China began to rise, and of course, US began to some extent, try to curb or contain. So that's the reason, especially under Trump administration, I think this trade war really escalated, especially if you look at nowadays. Well, I think especially during his second term, people began to use trade war to describe the relationship between China and the United States. So that's why you can imagine, as I said, this is a structure problem. You cannot solve easily, but you can, I would say, temporarily suspend it. As you can see, the dialogue, our meeting occurred in South Korea this time, and the two countries agreed to, suspend their tariff and rare earth control. So I think it's a long process of negotiation. And of course, both countries are waiting for a long-term solution in the future.
We were witnessing that Mr. President Trump was quite, he was very happy and he was more looking like a hopeful. But the body language of President Xi was quite composed. He was quite composed. He didn't say, too much over there. I mean, in front of the media. So what's your assessment?
Well, of course, President Trump is more like a transactional president and always, call himself as the deal maker. So that means he actually got some deal. As we know that, for example, Chinese TikTok now basically is under US control. And of course, also Chinese promised to lose control on rare earths, which also I think make US happy, especially President Trump's close associate. So that's why I think from this meeting, you can definitely say President Trump and the US, they really, made some of their hopes materialized. And for the Chinese, I think that's a positive, gesture. But Chinese expectation, I think, is more than that. So that's why I think there's a long way to go. So both the president, they really have different reactions to this meeting. But in general, I would say both sides are positively portray this meeting.
The trade gap, that the trade deficit that we see between the United States of America and the Chinese trade to the America, I think that is a big troubling point to the Americans, because if there is a let us see that in 2024 the two countries' total trade volume was $600 billion, but it was in the favor of Chinese. Do you think that disturbs the American administration?
Well, I think this is the current, Trump administration's understanding in terms of trade deficit. And of course, whenever you have international trade, you will have a deficit. The problem is how can you solve this problem? For Trump administration, I think this method and solution is so simple. You just impose tariff or what to force the Chinese to purchase more, U.S. products. And again, one more question is you cannot allow Chinese to purchase high-tech products, right? So you basically ask the Chinese to purchase agriculture products. So that's why I think that's the problem. And also, I think for the President Trump, his purpose essentially is basically, as I mentioned, like transactional. He basically want to say cash, want to say company, want to say all this, company share. So that means he basically want to get something, then he can get his wider support, especially among American voters. So that's why it's more like a performative, I would say, for Trump administration.
Do you think that the consumers in the America would also be affected if there's a higher slap of tariffs on the Chinese imports?
Well, definitely, I think China is the major exporting country, especially to United States. If you impose high tariff, that's essentially American taxpayers suffer, or American customers they really suffer. But at the same time, you have to acknowledge that you have some other countries. So that means United States is trying to diversify its supply chain. For example, for some light industrial products like clothes and other products, you can really import it from other countries like Pakistan, textile products, right? So that's why I say, well, both sides suffered, American customers, Chinese sellers, but of course, at the same time, both countries try to solve this, problem. China tried to diversify market, United States tried to diversify importer. So I think that's the method two countries try to use to solve this problem.
Do you think that, as you were saying, that President Trump is more concerned about his own popularity within the America, as well as he is addressing his, the core voters and the supporters that has brought him back to the White House, for the second term? Uh, and also, do you think that President Trump is more concerned about the domestic industries and the domestic manufacturing of the United States of America?
Well, it's really hard to see he really care about, United States manufacturing industry. That's a political rhetorics. But the truth we know so far is, as I mentioned, he is a transactional president. And also, when you look at all these US foreign policies and so-called US foreign interest, our US interest, is highly combined with Trump's family interest, his personal interest, his friends' interest. That's the reason when you look at all these several deals, for example, they got the Chinese TikTok, right? TikTok. Then, of course, it is reported that his son could be a board member. And of course, he's very actively involved in Middle East affairs, especially Palestinian Gaza issue. Then his son-in-law Kushner is discussing real estate business in Gaza, right? And of course, we know his some other friends, try to use him to make deals. So that's why I said, well, he probably care about U.S. manufacturing industry, U.S. interest, but that interest, our industry have to be in line with his personal and family interest. So that's the reason when you look at Trump's foreign policy, usually if a country or regime can provide a good deal to himself, to his friends, to his associate, then you can say usually he can build good relationship. Like a Qatari give him an airplane, he's happy, right? Then Chinese now give TikTok, I think his friends, his son are happy. Then Middle East, all these countries basically try to solve the Gaza issue. Then his son-in-law basically will get some possible real estate business. So you have to look at this combination, not simply look at so-called US interest or his personal interest. I think it's a subtle combination between national interest and personal interest.
What about now? What about the Chinese? Do you think that the way the Chinese have been growing uh, for decades, they were improving their economy, their large scale manufacturing, their medium scale manufacturing, and the way they are improving, and it is said that maybe after 4 to 5 years time, China will become the number one economy of the world. At the moment, naturally, the Americans are on the number one. So, do you think the Americans' policies or their decisions or their strategies can block and stop the Chinese growth to become the number one economy of the world?
Well, these are the two questions. First of all, I really don't know which country will be the number one economy in the next 5 or 10 years. Because you see, all these economists have made a lot of predictions, but nobody really can make sure, right? Second, no country can actually stop big power like China. So that means Chinese development, Chinese economic achievement is more depend on China than United States. So as long as you have a stable policy, no matter diplomatic foreign policy or economic policy, then I think China can go its own way. United States cannot prevent. But when you talk about the future economy or future, competitiveness, you really have to look at, well, either market economy work out or what socialist economy will work out. That's a big issue, I think, for not only politicians but also for economists, political scientists, because we see a lot of scholars, they have discussed the former Soviet Union, their economy, their military, everything. So now I think basically we have the similar issue, similar comparison, but China is more complicated than Soviet Union. So in this sense, I cannot predict whether China can be the number one economy in next 5 years, or what can US, contain China, because China is too big to be contained. China's future is really, dependent on China.
What about the BRI, uh, that is being initiated by the Chinese, built and One Belt, One Road initiative, taken by the Chinese? Do you think that that is going to contribute to the Chinese economy, and wherever they are going to invest on the infrastructure or on the manufacturing or establishing, the industrial zones in various countries? Do you think that that is also going to help the individual country as well as the Chinese economy?
Well, I think with that ideological lens, you really see BRR will definitely benefit, China and other countries, because otherwise no country will receive this project, right? But the problem is to implement the BRR project, you really need kind of, a globalized environment. For example, liberal, market economy, or you have peaceful global, environment. But now we have US-China competition. Many countries are forced to choose side, or either some countries are forced, for example, in terms of critical mineral resources, now you have to face the dilemma. Either to sell to the Chinese or to the United States, especially if you think about nowadays when United States politicize the shipbuilding industry, right? For South Korea, you cannot simply say, well, I just, sell my cargo ship globally. You cannot, because you will have some political, consequences, sanctions, right? So for BRR, I think at this time, it is still benefit all these receiving countries and China. But at the same time, I think it really encounters some challenges, especially for countries who need both US and China. They have to balance. They have to think about how you can, for example, on the one hand, attract the Chinese investment. On the other hand, you need to sell your products to United States. For example, you have to look at your export records, right? For Pakistan, for example, do you export your textile products to China or United States? Which country, make more money, right? So that's the reason I think Now many countries, they refine BRR project. And even China, they try to refine to say, well, now they try to have a small and refined project, which means huge project. You sometimes you are carrying some geopolitical, significance, which is not really good, especially now in the context of U.S. China competition.
How you see the CPEC project between China and Pakistan?
Well, I think, of course, in the past years, it's quite successful. And I visit Pakistan several times. When you look at Islamabad airport, when you look all these highways, and also you have some other like power plants, another project. I think that's definitely great for the long term. For example, Pakistan is a medium power. You need to develop basic infrastructure, electricity. So that means you have to invest. You have to need someone to build it. And of course, for Western country, United States, I don't think all this private, investor will come to Pakistan to invest for 20 years or 30 years because they will invest in more, quick cash making industry, right? So that's, I think, good. But on the other hand, I think BRR especially is government driven. It's more like, interstate project. That means you have to think about how to allow local private business and even to allow, individuals to benefit from this project. If you build a huge, hydrogen project, and then of course people, can get electricity. Then the problem is how can you make people to get some money, to make a living, right? So that's what I think now both China and many other countries, they try to redefine the BRR. Sometimes they refine the BRR either to be smaller or to be, finer. But basically they try to meet the basic demand, not only for government, but also for local people.
How you see the Pakistani policy towards the two big powers, the Chinese and the Americans?
Well, that's a really big topic, as you know. In the past decades, Pakistani foreign policy is more towards China, as we all know. You have Pakistan Dosti. But recently, of course, when you say Pakistani high-rank official visit to U.S., especially all these deals, including rare earth, project, United States investment, and also some other critical mineral cooperation. That's probably, add some, I would say, concern to the Chinese because this is the time when U.S. and China engage in competition. Then, if you will, Pakistan take a more, I would say, not really pro-US, but more balanced, position. So that's a little bit different. I would say that kind of, recalibrating Pakistani's foreign relation with both Chinese and America. But I think that's understandable for any country, definitely. The foreign policy is dynamic, right? No country will have, decades or century-long stable foreign policy. It's really changing all the time, depending on the international environment. So now, of course, I think Pakistan, on the one hand, they try to maintain good relationship and tradition with China. On the other hand, they try to reopen the channel with the United States because given the fact that Pakistan really faced a serious challenge, not only from India, but also from Afghanistan, for all this big security issue, I think United States probably can offer more help, right? So that's the reason it's really depend on how and when Pakistan define its critical national interest, and then it will accordingly modify its foreign policy. But probably now I would say Pakistan initiated a more balanced foreign policy, especially now when you have US-China competition. It's really hard for Pakistan to be with either side, right?
So, do you think that a country like Pakistan, its geographical locations, its the challenge that you have mentioned on the from the eastern border as well as from the western border, do you think that the Pakistan should keep this balance between the two powers?
As I said, it's a dynamic. The foreign policies, all foreign policies are defined by, national interest, and the national interest are keep changing. I think for now, especially when Pakistan faced a serious security challenge, especially with its relationship with Afghanistan, TTP. Then I think, because of U.S. Security assistance, intelligence assistance, and even previous Pakistan-U.S. ally, relationship. So that's why I think Pakistan, in terms of security issue, probably will have more cooperation with the United States. Because also I think at the same time, when you look at Pakistan, India, and China relationship, if India improve relationship with Pakistan, I think Pakistan will definitely, will worry about that. So that's why they also try to balance its relationship with major power like United States. So it's all about dynamic foreign policy change. It's all about dynamic, national interest change.
When Pakistan and the Indians went to a war, in May this year, what is the assessment of the scholars in United States of America regarding India? Because the Indians have been presenting themselves as the savior of the Western world, and especially countering the Chinese, especially from American perspective. So, what is now a kind of a assessment and opinion of the scholars in United States of America regarding India?
I think especially under, Joe Biden's administration, you still have the so-called global liberal order, under which India is perceived as one of the so-called democracy and one of the key, ally of United States to contain China. But quickly, you see the rise of global populism, both in United States, India, China, and many other countries, even including Turkey. So basically means there is no so-called global liberal order. So that's why when Trump took office, he quickly redefined the U.S. national interest. So that's why you can imagine United States quickly, improve relationship with other countries simply based on its own national interest, not like a global idealism. So that's why, in this sense, United States, especially military, aside, they say Pakistan's victory over India, especially I think they are shocked by the Pakistani technology through Chinese hand. So that's why I think from the one hand, of course, they try to tighten security tie with Pakistan. On the other hand, I think it provides a opportunity to reassess Pakistan and also Chinese military technology. So that's one reason I think even some Chinese, they worry about the possible technological leaks from Pakistan to
Mm.
United States. So I'm not really sure if United States try to use this opportunity to learn more about Pakistan Chinese technology, but it really indicates United States began to see Pakistan as a really powerful country, not like before based on ideology. Joe Biden, they try to make friends with so-called democracy. But even India is not really a democracy. You really have this populism, especially Modi's administration, actually made India more like populist, sometimes more like regional hegemony, which is not really good, even for liberal, camp when they say, well, India's practice radical, policies, really regional hegemonic policy. That's actually changed image in many, Western countries. So that's why I think, when people look at national interest, especially for Trump administration, some other country, well, Pakistan, foreign policy, Pakistani defense are very effective. So that's why now it's more like, power-based diplomacy is more like interest-based diplomacy, not ideology-based, not, liberalism-based, not globalism-based. So in this sense, all these empty words about liberty, democracy basically failed. Now you basically look at technology, defense capability, the possible, utility. So that's where Pakistan became more and more important in terms of security cooperation, critical mineral supply, and the Pakistan Middle Eastern relations because the United States try to tighten the relationship with Arab countries, Pakistan definitely will be indirectly incorporated into this larger and broader, security pact. So that's why Pakistan, I think, is more important in the eyes of the United States.
How you see the Taliban's shift, their closeness to the Indians, and then the proxies they are, supporting inside Pakistan to destabilize. Naturally, on the one side in Balochistan, they are hitting or they are, harming our CPEC projects with our friends Chinese. And then on the KP side as well, they are creating a lot of problems. And the Indians are openly supporting the Taliban regime. So how you see that? Why the Indians have chosen to support a terrorist group which previously they were condemning, in fact.
Well, that's why, as I mentioned already, national interests are dynamic. It change all the time, right? So that's the reason previously India say Taliban as enemy, but now they say as ally. So it's really, unfortunate to see that Pakistan and Afghanistan as the two Muslim countries began to have this deteriorating relationship. But one big problem is when you look at all this nation-making process, for Pakistan and Afghanistan, both countries, they really, have faced some challenges. For Pakistan, of course, you have a long-term Balochistan issue, you have other issues, domestic issue. For Afghanistan, you really cannot build a modern nation state. You still use some kind of tribalism. You still use some kind of local religion, based ideology. That will not make you to build a good nation or country. If you build a country, you really cannot just rely on traditional tribalism, religion to mobilize different non-state actors to provoke a neighboring country. You have to think about the broader neighboring relationship as the national relationship or what interstate relationship. So
Mm.
that's why here I think there is a huge geopolitical element involved in Pakistan and Afghanistan relationship. Of course, you can imagine at this time, India tried to use Afghanistan because Afghanistan, relatively speaking, is the only country that can probably destabilize Pakistan. And also, I think for Afghanistan, it's really unfortunate because if you really have out war with Afghanistan, your economy destroyed, even regime will be overthrown. Then, of course, you can imagine our economy, especially regional economy with China, with other countries, will be seriously affected. So I hope both countries can negotiate because if you want to make Afghanistan stable, Pakistan stable, you really have to think about how to make nation state. Because
Mm.
we talk about nation state, we're not talking about 17th century European nation state. We're not talking about early 20th century European nationalism. We really talk about how can you think about all these issues through a national or state perspective, not religious, tribal, all these lenses. That's really outdated. You cannot build a country if you use all these traditional method and the means. So I think at the very beginning, when Pakistan supports Taliban, they really also use some kind of geopolitical thinking. If you think of Soviet Union, of course, that's how you defeat superpower, right? So they think, well, we use Taliban to overthrow all this republic, then probably you have more influence or strategic expansion or strategic depths into Afghanistan. I think that's totally wrong because, again, if you want to keep international relations or interstate relations properly, you really cannot expect the so-called strategic depths in other countries. That's impossible. So for India, they still practice the same strategy, and I'm sure that will not work. So the only strategy I think for all countries that can work is how can you improve your national interest? For Pakistan, of course, national interest is about peace and development. For
Mm.
Afghanistan, I think the same. They need to develop economy, build a strong relationship, not only with China, India, Central Asian country, but also especially with Pakistan, because your export, all these, trading routes very much rely on Pakistan. So that's what I'm thinking in future, if all these countries, they really redefine their national interest, then probably they can really improve their relationship. Otherwise, if you always use religion, tribalism, you cannot build your own country, and also you cannot build interstate relations. Then you always have all this violence and conflict.
Couple of questions. Thank you for your precious time. One is that Mr. President Trump has announced to, once again test the atomic bomb and the atomic facility. Why he has, declared this at this moment? What could be the significance? What could be a message to the Russians as well as to the Chinese and to the rest of the world?
Well, I think before United States really depend on globalism through all these allies from Europe to Asia to really maintain global order, which means you really don't have to highlight your nuclear capability. But now, of course, as you see, you have Russia-Ukrainian war. You even have a Russian rhetoric, threat against the United States. Then, of course, from United States perspective, you have, Chinese nuclear expansion. Then you have to have something because, as I said, since globalism is declining, you have to, make yourself more powerful. So that's why nuclear weapon is the only, solution for United States to demonstrate its power, especially to counter Russia and the Chinese. And this other hand, I think to restore this kind of test is also about rebuilding U.S. military. This is the long-term goal, I think, for the new Trump administration. As you can see from their restructuring of the Department of Defense and from restructure of their global military, deployment, and also they try to restructure and to some extent they renew their new nuclear weapons. So I think that's really inconsistent with current Trump administration's ambition to build America as a strong power. They really don't care about other regions, other countries. So if you want to make America great again, our powerful again, you really have to strengthen your own economy, your own military, including nuclear weapons.
How you see the Trump's policy towards the Middle East, the ceasefire that was being, broken down by the Israelis many times. In fact, last 1 week or 10 days time since this was being signed. So, how you see the American policy towards the Gaza and the Middle East?
Well, when you look at Trump administration, in general, his policy, I would say, will fail because he's not really a political elite. His administration is more like a business, transaction. So that's why when he make a deal in Middle East, in other countries, when he try to make so-called peace in Middle East, especially, he has actually personal ambition. As you know, Nobel Peace Prize, right? His ambition. Then, of course, also business ambition from Gaza real estate business and to all this Qatari airplane gift and to Saudi investment in his son-in-law's company. So that's why as long as this transaction is going well, I think the so-called peace deal will be okay. But as long as all this business is not going well, now of course you can see that Israelis, they violate all this peace, agreement so constantly. The second level is he's not a political elite. He really does not have control over all these Israeli leaders, especially strategically. I would say Trump administration is really worse than previous government because you do not really have international coordination, international consensus. So that makes Israel too easily to break all this agreement. So we will say what will happen in future. But in general, I'm not really optimistic about his deals, especially in Middle East, especially with China and other countries. But of course, for himself, his family, his associate, his friends, they have really benefited a lot, especially in this digital era. Since you cannot make a lot of money through traditional means, then you have to think about new methods, new industry, right? And new ways to benefit yourself and your family and your associate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ma Haiyun, history associate professor of Frostburg State University, Maryland, United States of America, for your precious time
You're welcome.
and excellent analysis of the worldviews, the challenges that the world is facing at the moment, and from the American perspective. Thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.